Okay, hi, my name is Rebecca Thornton,
Hi, I'm Ariana Schott.
and we're grade 12 students at Saunders Secondary School. Today we're going to be talking to you guys in this podcast about some Native issues and what it's like to live on a reserve for First Nations people.
We'll be focusing a lot on Attawapiskat with the recent suicides, and we will further that by looking at life on other reserves as well. Attawapiskat is an isolated First Nation reserve that's located in the Kenora District in Northern Ontario. It's at the mouth of the Attawapiskat River on James Bay.
And in Attawapiskat, there's about 1,800 people located in the community, and it's a quite small, confined place that is only accessible by air for half the year. The fact that it's only accessible by air makes it really hard for them to get shipments of food and resources that they may need. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Attawapiskat homes and kind of what they are so you can paint a scene in your head. So when I was researching, I found that a lot of the residents lived in small trailers or shacks, which are really poorly built with like plywood and just old things like that. And even tents, which is really dangerous for the cold winters that they do have up there and has caused a lot of concern in the past.
There's also a lot of generations of families that will live in each house, so it's a large group of people living in small houses. And they also, since they aren't built to code, there are a lot of safety hazards that are there because if an accident happens, there's no way for them to know about it or to get out in time.
I found a lot of articles of people in native reserves, not just Attawapiskat, who have major mold in their house because it's not completely waterproof. They have leaks all over the place, and their children are inhaling all these toxic things and living in this toxic environment. It can cause a lot of mental illness, which we'll continue to talk about later on in the podcast. I found articles that talk about living in Attawapiskat and living in other native reserves where residents have no running water, they don't have indoor plumbing, they don't have indoor washrooms.
Yeah, reserves have been described as third world countries living in a more modern place. They are just so distant and put away, and even the word reserved separates them from us in a way that really isn't fair.
Yeah, and all of this obviously can cause mental health, which relates to a lot of the suicides that are happening in Attawapiskat. But before we talk about that, I want to delve a little deeper into water conditions in the reserves, because I think that's a huge issue. I was so surprised reading some of the facts that I did read, because it's just so shocking how terrible it is. And even for us, we don't realize that if you're Canadian, just an average citizen, the odds of you having unsafe tap water is 1 in 3 people. But the severity of the tap water and how dangerous it is to drink for average Canadian citizens is nowhere near what it's like for Native citizens. In a reserve called Pikangikum, excuse my pronunciation, 95% of the 400 homes in this reserve have no indoor plumbing whatsoever. So no running tap water, no showers, no plumbing to use the restroom, nothing like that. Out of 290 reserve water systems, 50% were at high risk of delivering unsafe drinking water and 18 were at medium risk.
And in relation to Attawapiskat, they have been asking for 10 years, and they haven't been able to afford to improve their water intake system.
I want to move on a bit to talk about the suicides now. Obviously, we're going to get some opinions on those later. But in relation, a lot of kids, I've read even articles of 8-year-olds trying to commit suicide.
I read the oldest was 71.
71. So it can range from 8 years old to 71 years old of these, that these First Nations people are committing suicide because it's their way of revolting against what kind of living situation they have. They have little health care. There's not a solid doctor at the hospital in Attawapiskat. So when these suicides started happening, they had no way to help these people. They had no mental health workers. They had no youth workers to help the kids. I found that a lot of them did range from like 8 to 20 and around there in their youth. And that's because they get abused at school. They live terrible lives in their homes, and people just ignore them. No one really cares. No one acts like they care. The government doesn't share it. People don't broadcast things like this. And I think that's terrible.
So they found that in Attawapiskat, they had a 15-bed hospital, no full-time doctors. The doctor's only there 4 days a week, 3 weeks out of the month, and then on weekends. And there are only 2 nurses on duty. So there has been a regular mental health worker there, but only for 9 months because there's a shortage in housing.
I also read that mental health worker rarely goes, but they do, since the community said they were in a state of emergency, they have sent out 5 mental health workers, and this was caused by the 11 suicide attempts in April and 28 in March.
I mean, they have a population of 2,000 people, and they can only address a quarter of their health needs. So if you are in a community where you can see people in pain and nobody's getting any help, then there's a lot of hopelessness and sadness that comes with that.
Depression. I read articles about students who go to school, have a terrible time at school, and go home and have a terrible time at home. And there's no extra activities for them to do. There's no youth group. There's no youth center. There's nothing to do for them. And so I can imagine how mental illness would be so prominent for these kids and for these adults even. I found it completely revolting to us that because of the way Native reserves are, because we don't fund them and we don't help them, an 8-year-old wants to take their life.
And this news that is huge and very important and was really getting out there and spreading to people, and suddenly people want to change, was then pushed aside when the big fire happened.
Yeah, Fort McMurray.
So we ignore these problems, or we listen to them and we feel bad, and then we push that aside because it's not right in our face. But it's here and it's in Canada, and
it's been here for a while.
And if people want to say that Canada is accepting of different cultures and nice to everybody, then maybe it needs to work at helping
Aboriginals people.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to discuss all of this with Native people and those who live in the communities and understand and find out their opinions on the suicides and the living conditions. So we will be doing that in the rest of this podcast.
Yeah. So stay tuned for some fun guests and we'll discuss this topic. So now we're going to be talking to a former Saunders Secondary School student named Melina about what it's like to live in her community and what her opinions are.
Okay, I'm Melina Anton Dockstader from the Oneida First Nations.
What is life like on your reserve?
So, honestly, it's pretty quiet. I say quiet, but that was just my experience. There's actually a lot that goes on, so it's hard to explain. Because the way I grew up, it was really quiet. It's like living out in the country.
Okay, so why don't you talk about schooling? That's where
It's honestly not that good. I remember I didn't stay for it. The school only goes up to grade 6, and I didn't even stay for the whole thing. I actually moved to town, and I remember vividly, in grade 6, I was there for 3 months before I moved back. But in those 3 months, I learned so much more than you would learn there. Their curriculums are so far behind. The teachers are underpaid, and the teachers have to work so hard just to get the kids to learn because they're not it's not the same learning experience as it is as a public school in town. It's really different.
A different environment.
And it's different too because whereas here it's everyone's just kind of friends, whereas down there everyone's family. Your cousins with everyone, so it's it's even before you like when you're starting school, it's just you're always with your friends. So,
Yeah.
but then it sounds kind of nice, but then afterwards it's kind of bad because what I noticed what happens when you're done grade 6 is you move on to grade 7, 8 into the Lambeth schools or Delaware. But when I did that, what I noticed is a lot of kids just tend to stick with natives and like they don't really try to
Talk to other people.
yeah.
Because you've been with like
Your family and all this
people
native
your
yeah.
whole life. That's all you know.
And they don't really get that exposure to culture. So when they do it, I feel like they're in grade 7, and this is for a lot of kids, it's like their first time experiencing other culture. So it's kind of like culture shock to them.
So what's housing like? You said you moved into town for a couple months, and how did that differ?
Well, when I lived with my grandparents and my dad and my aunt, and so that's like 4 people in this tiny 4-bedroom house, and like it sounds big, but it really wasn't. Like most houses down there aren't pre-built. Most people build them themselves. Like ours was pretty okay. Like it's not up to standards with like towns or houses in town, because like and even then like ours is above a lot of the other people. I visited another house where they don't even have like the drywall up, like it's still like just the outside wall and then like the supports, and that's all you see, and then there's like the wiring and everything's right there, but then that's how their houses have been for years, and like not many people have money to change it.
Yeah.
And like it's interesting, like this is kind of like the bad part, whereas if you
Talk about the bad part.
like, okay, like this from what I know and like what people tell me, like you'll see certain really, really nice houses on the res, and the downside of that is generally because it's on the reservation, and if their house is just being renovated, it's really nice already, they're more than likely a drug dealer. So it's like, yeah, there's about 2 really nice houses, and like everyone knows, like most, like people talk about it, like it's open, but we don't talk about it. Like
Yeah.
we know about it, but it's not like we're not gonna like report them. Like it's weird.
But do you think that also talks to the point that there's not a lot of jobs open that can support a family in the reserve?
They try, but what I've noticed is what they're trying to do now is, I was a part of it 2 years ago, they have these student job programs where they're helping kids get jobs to have experience, that way they can go and get jobs. Because the biggest thing from my experience was my dad didn't want me to stay on the res. His biggest thing was go to school so you can leave, and like this isn't exactly a place you want to spend the rest of your life. Like it was nice, like my childhood was fine and all that, but it was just like it really isn't the best experience, because like
it's interesting how your parent who like grows up on the reserve, and we had this person come into our class and talk about like native spirituality, and it's a lot about community and being with your people, and it's funny how some parents are like, because like, it's not best for you here,
because they know, well, it's just the fact that like you said, there's not a lot of opportunities down there, so they want what's best for you. Like there's more opportunities off the reserve. What's interesting though is there are a lot of people that they leave, they do really well, and then they come back and bring what they learned back, which is nice, but like then it's really prejudiced on the res. Like if you're doing really well out there and come back, a lot of people think like right away they think, oh, they just think they're better than us just because. It's interesting, like someone finishes college and then they change, they grow as a person, but everyone's like, oh, they think they're so snobby now, like they think they're better than us just because they finished college, and it's like, I don't know like where to go with that. Like
people, it's just, I understand that's not really supportive of people, because I feel like it's this big stereotype, and I don't know if it's true or not, that a lot of native people don't go to post-secondary and they just go back, but then it's kind of like the loop of...
It's really interesting because there aren't a lot that go to post-secondary, which is really strange because our post-secondary actually gets paid for by Secretariat. So whatever, like, it's crazy, honestly. Like, natives have such an opportunity to go to college and do whatever they want because it gets paid for, but none of them take it.
Yeah.
Most of them don't even finish high school. Most of them, like, I know so many of my friends that dropped out, and like, it's interesting because like half the natives that did graduate weren't even half the ones that were here, and like a lot of people probably don't know that.
Well, I have a friend who's native, and she said she went to college and she got so much grief about having it paid for that she doesn't want to go back until she can pay for it herself.
This comes to that stereotype too, like what I've heard a lot is people, like, biggest thing I've heard from natives is, oh, you get everything handed to you, like you have all this, and it's like, it's actually not that great. Like, I don't know, like people, like, it comes down to like the whole welfare is like people think you're getting handouts. I did the math, like you get I'm on welfare. I get $600 a month. But when I did the math, that's less than minimum wage. And most people complain about minimum wage, whereas people on welfare get like half of that, what you get paid.
So, have you heard about, like, I don't know if you've heard, like, what's happening in Attawapiskat and living conditions in other reserves around Canada? Do you think because you live closer to a city, yours is better taken care of?
It is in terms of certain things, but like every summer, people don't know this, I don't know, like on the reserve every summer, if it rains too hard, we get a boil water advisory, so we don't even have clean water half the time. Like every summer it happens. Whereas like when I lived in town, we never had to worry about that. It was just you could drink water from the tap. Whereas on the res, it's you never know, because especially with the band office, they're not really super fast on getting information out.
So, what is life like as a young Native? Because in Attawapiskat, a lot of the Native youth is committing suicide.
That I think it comes down to where you're from too. Because I come from Oneida, and like I said, my experience was different. I didn't live on the reservation my entire life, and even the times I did, I didn't turn out like a lot of the kids did.
Would you say that maybe the stress and some aspects of living on a reserve can cause mental illness and can set some teens up for kind of drugs and dropping out of school?
Failure? Yeah, like I think some of it does, but I think it also is like influenced. Like a lot of the parents aren't that good either, so it's like it's just this perpetual thing.
Cycle.
Like,
So, do you feel like it's stuff like that, like the division, that where bad things have to happen to bring you together, or like the drugs and stuff like that? Do you feel like that would contribute to the suicides and stuff? Like, what do you think?
I'm not sure, because on my reservation we never really talked about it, because it's never like we're not like Attawapiskat's different because their living conditions are worse than ours. So I think that adds to it. It's weird too, because I'm just gonna say this. I don't know if you guys saw it on the news about the teen that just committed suicide, and that was it Woodstock or something, or
Woodstock.
Was it? They just committed, and it was a huge thing. The entire school was in it. Most of the city was in on it. But like, Attawapiskat has these kids are committing, like young kids too are committing suicide.
Like 8 years old.
Yeah, and it's a large thing. And like, they even said on the news, like, oh, people are just gonna forget about it. And people did. Like, all these other things are happening, and they're just getting pushed back. Like,
I find that as well. Like with the Fort McMurray fire, that happened like directly after Attawapiskat was on the news, and then it was like
everyone went for that.
Yeah,
it's like I understand these people lost their homes, and it's of course important, but it's just they know they're going to be forgotten. Like,
I find like news broadcasters don't really talk about Native problems. Like Attawapiskat, this has been happening for years and years and years.
When I remember it was actually that chief of Attawapiskat. She was the one that did the hunger strike to try and talk to Harper, and even then he was like, "Harper's special." Every Native I know hated him. I remember them mentioning that Stephen Harper actually said that almost 2,000 women missing over the last 30 years isn't an issue. Like things like that. Whereas now and then it kind of upsets me now because Justin Trudeau, he's really for the Natives and the Native youth, which I think is great, but then there's so many people that are like, oh, Justin Trudeau doesn't care about anyone else. It's like, he's caring about the people like nobody else cares about. Like,
he's caring for the people who need to be cared for.
He's caring for the marginalized. So a lot of the kids in Attawapiskat and communities like that have been saying, like, while living in the reserve, that kind of feels separated from society, very alone. It's depressing.
It does. Like, I didn't realize it because when I was a kid, I had a big household too, and no one really, like, we did venture to town where there's some people on the reserve that don't have that luxury. They don't have cars. They don't have cars that can go off the res. Like, they're kind of stuck there, so they don't have that opportunity to go out and go do things. So I can see where that comes from.
Especially like living in the middle of like Attawapiskat can only be like serviced by planes, like, for a couple months.
It's out of the way, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have to go like out of your way to go somewhere to do this.
When you look at all these problems, where do you think we need to start fixing them?
It starts with the youth, but I think it also, you have to influence the adults too. Like, I'm not going to say start with the adults because they're already set in their ways in a sense. So influence them, but then work with the kids, I guess.
So what do you think like average people all around Canada can do to help Native issues.
Learn about them and
Learn
stop being
about
so
them?
like stop stereotyping natives. Like
Mhm.
as soon as you're native, you must be traditional. You must do this and that. I don't know. People always talk about the cultures that have already like lost their culture. Like there's so many like nations that don't exist anymore. Whereas like mine, it's starting to die off. The only people that speak Oneida fluently are the elders. Like my grandma, she can understand it, but she doesn't speak in Oneida. My great grandmother and my great aunt, they speak Oneida and they understand it. And like it's just like with kids and adults, it's kind of gone from us. Like sure we say things, but like we're just saying like little phrases. We're not fluent in it anymore.
Yeah.
So we're losing our like. Honestly, I think we've kind of lost our culture at this point. People are trying to bring it back, but at this point, it's such a hard thing to bring back.
You think there'd be any way that it could be brought back? Like, I know, do we have?
We
like,
have Oneida,
native
but like the
classes?
curriculums for
It's
this,
not very-
it's not the best. Like the teachers are good, they try, but it's just on it. Like we even have our own curriculum in the school on the reservation, but it's literally just saying animals, colors, and numbers over and over every year. That's it. It's not learning how to have a conversation. It's not trying to voice like an opinion of anything. Like it's just repeating things over and over, and that's not how you learn a language.
Yeah. So to finish off, do you have any thoughts or anything to say about reserves like Attawapiskat, or even ones that don't have drinking water or like washrooms in their homes?
I wish the best for them.
Wish the best for them.
Things like the last part you said that actually happened. That's actually happened in my family. We've only had plumbing for the last. The house is about almost 30 years old, and we've only had it for maybe about 20 years. Mm-hmm. They told me that they used to wash in a basin. That was such a normal for them. Even when my aunt was going into high school, they still just washed from a basin. Like it was just that. Like it's an interesting experience. It's not all bad, but it does have.
Do you think it would be better if they had like homes like they did here that were of good quality and had running water and stuff? Do you think living on a reserve would be an easier thing?
It'd be easier, but it's still hard because we still have to travel out of our way just to get things. At the same time, it's only so much room. It's not a big reservation, and there's a lot of people, so it's kind of tough.
Yeah. Do you find it's overcrowded at all?
At times, it doesn't look like it. If you go by, it doesn't look like it. But then you have to remember, there's at least 5 people in every house. Mm-hmm. Like in my house, it's my grandparents, both my grandparents, my aunt, and my cousin, and me. But there was a time where it was also my dad and then my other cousins. So there was almost 7 people in this house.
Yeah.
And they're not like 4-bedroom house. You think it's big? Ours isn't because
it can be small bedrooms.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for coming and talking to us. That was really great.
So next, we will be talking to Roger Thomas, Chief of the Muncie Delaware Reserve, that's outside of St. Thomas, and he has been Chief since August 3rd, 2013.
Okay, so we kind of wanted to discuss Attawapiskat. So as a Chief, what is it like to hear about other communities going through stuff like
that? To be honest, it's heart-wrenching because, you know, what we don't know what the real issue is, I guess, and we ponder out what is it in community? Is it because you know, are there drugs involved? Is it just that bad there that people want to take their lives, or is there nothing there for the kids while they're growing up? You know, I've never visited Attawapiskat. I'd like to, but I haven't made it that far yet. And you know, if you get enough brains together behind all this, you go look at it and say, okay, well, why don't you try something like this? But whether it's been done or not, I don't know. So, but yeah, it's heartbreaking just to hear, you know, the attempted suicides overall.
Yeah, and the age range too.
Yeah.
It really shocked me that like 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds were even considering it.
Exactly. You know, what's going through their minds? What's going on at home? Why this stuff is going on? And you know, is it the home factor, or is it just kids doing, you know, listening to other kids and getting a stupid idea? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. So in the research we have done, we've found that some kids have been saying that they have been doing the suicides because of living conditions and schooling and stuff like that. Do you feel like you have any problems with living conditions or education in your community?
Well, living conditions, I think every First Nation has issues with their living conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't get the proper funding we're supposed to get to maintain the homes and whatnot. Now, you know, the majority of First Nations people are on OW, Ontario Works or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it has to do with education on how to keep your house up to the standards, right? You know, change your filters, check for this, check for that, and whatnot. And a lot of our people don't have that.
Yeah.
And if there was a program out there where they could come and teach you how to do all this, you know, you'd probably get half the people out to go through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we were just wondering if when you hear about issues like this in other communities, does it bring your community closer together?
It somewhat brings our communities close together, more or less something to talk about. And I think a lot of them think more than they talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll just wonder, you know, could this be an epidemic? Because, you know, they start wondering about kids around here and whatnot. I've got the same thing. I've got 3 boys, so, you know, those thoughts don't go through my mind. I mean, they do go through my mind, but, you know, it's, you know, you just want to sit and think, what's the problem, you know?
Yeah.
How can we help? I guess that's the other thing. You know, the first thing when all this was going on was, you know, is there something we can do?
Yeah.
Well, how do you believe that we could start to improve Native lives across Canada? What do you think we should start doing?
What do I think we should start doing? Jeez, that opens a whole lot there.
So a lot. That's a good thing, though.
Exactly. I mean, getting the government to listen is probably the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I agree.
Take notice on all First Nations, not just ones that have all of a sudden there's a pop-up issue of suicide. You know, a lot of this wouldn't have happened if a lot of these communities were being looked at to start with.
Mm-hmm.
I found that, yeah.
Yeah, the government sits back and they, you know, it's the old thing of we'll wait till something goes wrong on the First Nations and we'll ride in on our white horse and save everyone.
Right.
Oh, I'm tired of that, you know. I was chief back 10 years ago, and we had issues, and you know, INAC never stepped in until we had protests, and then they really didn't step in then either, because you know, to me, it's basically we're giving the individuals at INAC jobs basically. Yeah. When things screw up on First Nations, all of a sudden they're the heroes. They can come and save you, clean it up, and do whatever else. But a lot of this wouldn't happen if it was taken care of in advance.
So do you think if more Native issues were broadcasted across Canada, do you think that would help at all?
It would help, but then you have the other percentage of the population that just says, oh, it's just those Indians. Mm-hmm. That whole staying there and whatnot. And it's, you know, to me, it's garbage. It happens in non-native communities also. They just I don't know, it's more blowing up, I guess, when it's in a First Nation.
Yeah.
But, you know, then it's the finger pointing thing again.
Mm-hmm.
So just lastly, we just wanted to know, a lot of the people we've talked to say that education needs to be spread about these issues. And how do you think we could start educating people on what's happening?
I'm not really sure about that one.
It's a hard question, yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, well, in my household, my son's 12, and, you know, he talks about things openly and freely. Mm-hmm. I'm timid about talking to other kids about things in this range because, you know, I don't know what their thinking is.
Yeah.
But, you know, the high school kids and whatnot, they all talk about it. You know, I guess, you know, there's no point hiding things on kids because they're going to hear about it. So, you know, it should be publicized to everyone, I guess. And, you know, and if we can find out why a lot of this is happening, you know, it would save us a whole lot of headache further on down the road in case it happened to one of us.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so in conclusion, we just want to thank both of our guests for talking to us, telling us their thoughts on all these issues, and letting us include them in this podcast.
Just to review, we have gone over some of the problems in education, jobs, housing, and water. I found it super interesting how drugs is a huge problem too. So the more you talk about it, the more you learn. So overall, I would say what the most important thing we've gotten out of this is broadcast Native issues. Don't not talk about things that are happening in our communities and around Canada, because one of the best ways to make things better and life better for Aboriginals is to talk about the issues and to tell the government and people out there that living in reserves isn't the greatest thing, and there are problems in these communities that need to be fixed.
Remember that education is vital in this, so if this has taught you anything new or spiked an interest in something, you should go look it up and tell people about it. And remember that this isn't an isolated incident in Attawapiskat. This isn't a small thing. There are problems in communities all over Canada, and so we can't just ignore them, but we have to talk about them.
So share this podcast with any friends and family that you want. Feel free to talk to us in Saunders if you go to Saunders. Thank you. My name is Rebecca Marlene.
I'm Ariana Shai.
Have a good day.